You're right, guys. This is another BronyDan Talks Doctor Who. Now, I know last time I said that I would be talking about the next story in the Key to Time season, which is the Stones of Blood. But obviously, if you've been keeping up with Doctor Who news, you'll of course know that we have just had the release of the next Lost Doctor Who story brought to us through animation. And that story is, of course, Fury from the Deep from season 5. This is the second Lost animated story we've had this year. The other one being, of course, the Faceless Ones. I'm not counting Power of the Daleks because that was just a re-release of the original release from 2016, just with better animation. Now, obviously, Fury from the Deep is, I would say, it's the last of the complete missing stories. All 6 episodes for this story no longer exist, and this is a story that is being greatly sought after. Even by myself, I think Fury from the Deep, I'm just going to say this out straight away, just from the audio we had from the story, I liked Fury from the Deep, and now that we actually have it in a physical copy, and it can now sit proudly on the shelf, I can say, yeah, it's still a really good story, and hey, let's just talk about it. So, in Fury from the Deep, the Doctor, Jamie, and Victoria land the TARDIS next to a to a sort of like an oil and gas sort of refinery where they're the sort of thing where they're pumping the gas out of the sea, and they discover that there's a mysterious sound coming from within the pipelines, and it's being sort of theorized that it's a heartbeat and that there is actually something living inside the pipes, and this turns out to be basically it's a creature made of seaweed. We don't know what exactly the creature is. It's just referred to as either the weed or the weed creature, and this creature has the ability to possess many people who are working on the refinery and out on the oil on the rigs that are out to sea, and its main goal is, as the Doctor theorizes, is to sort of make a sort of vast colony with both the gas companies and from the oil rigs and sort of use its influence to sort of control the world, basically. And so yeah, it's a pretty typical base under siege story, which by the time we get to Troughton's era, that was the standard storyline, particularly for season 5. Every story, apart from Enemy of the World, was a variation on the base under siege story. And Fury from the Deep is no exception to that. I mean, like, you have the sort of typical characters you'd see in the base under siege story. Like, you have the gruff sort of authority figure who doesn't believe that there is anything wrong. You have the scientist who sort of grows to believe the Doctor. You have somebody from the government who also doesn't believe it, but then they get slowly brought in to it, or somebody who sort of already believes that there is something wrong, but nobody believes them either. It's a very standard story for Doctor Who at this point, but I think what made Fury from the Deep stand out from the others is it's the creep factor of this story, that the menace that is in this story. It's like, I can remember SF Debris, when he did his review of Fury from the Deep years ago, he compared the atmosphere in Fury from the Deep to that of Jaws where, you know, you don't actually see what the creature is, really, but the thing that it inhabits, that becomes the actual threat and is the terrifying aspect of the series, which in this case is the foam that they use. So basically, anytime you see the foam in the story, that is a genuinely creepy idea, because you don't know what is actually going to be in the foam, and 9 times out of 10, it's a sort of a piece of the weed creature, and it, you know, it can just come out, drag you under, and yeah, you become under the influence of the weed. And that is such a very creepy idea to play with. And I think, you know, because obviously by this point we've just had the audio, and I think the audio sort of enhances that in a way. It plays out like a sort of a typical radio drama, which I think is quite a fitting which is quite fitting for this particular story, since, you know, this was actually sort of adapted from a radio play that Victor Pemberton had originally made for the BBC called The Slide, except in that story it was mud, and obviously for Fury from the Deep he adapted it for seaweed, basically, and he made seaweed and foam really quite scary in a way. So, like I said, that is why I think Fury from the Deep stands out particularly as a lost classic, because, you know, even from just the audio, it just makes you uneasy just from listening to it. So obviously, like with the Faceless Ones, this is a departure story, and of course for this it's Victoria's last story, and obviously this is a much better departure story than what Ben and Polly got in the Faceless Ones, mainly because Victoria actually does something in this story. She actually has an influence on the story as well, whereas with, as I said, with Ben and Polly, they completely disappear by episode 2, and they don't come back until episode 6, only to say, "We're gonna stay here, Doctor, bye." Whereas Victoria, I like how the story sort of sets the seeds of the fact that this is going to be her last story, where she's, throughout most of the story, she is starting to get, like she says, she's getting fed up of going to these places, and there's always some menace they have to fight. And you can understand where she's coming from, because literally from her first appearance, she's fought Daleks, Cybermen, Yeti twice, an Ice Warriors, an evil dictator, and she just thinks, no, I'm fed up with this now. I can't take this stress anymore. I'm tired of getting scared. And, you know, I think that's a very understandable reason to want to leave the TARDIS. And I know a lot of people tend to dismiss Victoria as a typical screaming Doctor Who companion, damsel in distress sort of character. And, you know, yeah, she kind of is, but then again, she is from the Victorian period. So I give her a bit more leeway for that. But also the fact that I think she's just a very lovely character. I loved, you know, even though Deborah Watling herself sort of says that, you know, all I ever did on Doctor Who was scream, you know, she does put her heart into it. And again, I just love that, I just love this TARDIS team. I love the Doctor, Jamie and Victoria so much. And like I said, even though I like the Doctor, Jamie and Zoe later on, there was just something about this trio that just made it feel special for me. I think maybe it's because it's the same reason why I have such a strong connection for the Fourth Doctor, Sarah Jane and Harry, because, you know, because both of them, they were two of my earliest Doctor Who TARDIS teams, and I just sort of love the interactions between them. I love, you know, I mean, like, between Jamie and Victoria, they sort of, like, they don't actually develop any kind of romantic relationship, but you do sense there is a strong bond between them. And of course, I think even Fraser Hines would say that Jamie would do anything to make sure Victoria's safe. And, you know, we sort of see that in this story quite a few times. And again, there's a good scenes between the Doctor and Victoria as well. And so, yeah, I think as Victoria's last story, I think she does... It gives her a good send-off, particularly since she does actually play some part at the end towards the creature's defeat at the end. I won't say how it is, but I think it's a nice way to give us some use. I think now is a good time to probably talk about the animation for this particular story. Now, the animation for this story is... It's odd. I'll just put it like that. It's a very interesting art style. It's not this. At least I don't. It doesn't look like it's the same. It's not the same people who did the animations previously that we've looked at, like Power, Macra, and Faceless Ones. This looks like This is a completely different animation team, and I don't know. I think it's an animation that's probably going to take me a while to get used to. I mean, I think, like, it looks a bit too... Like, some of it looks a bit too jagged for me and too box-like. And I think some of the outlines look a bit too thick on certain characters. And I think as well, in some cases, I think the animation sometimes just can't capture, like, the creepiness that the story is known for in certain points. Like, for example, the famous scene between Mr. Quill and Mr. Oak in Maggie Harris's room. Everyone knows about that famous scene because, you know, the only reason we have that clip in the archives is because the Australian broadcasters had cut it because it was deemed too terrifying for kids at the time. And it still is. I mean, like, just the still alone of Mr. Quill is... It is chilling. It is still such a creepy image. But I don't think the animation doesn't capture it as good as it could have been. Whereas, you know, like, the original scene is terrifying simply because of the slow zoom in on Mr. Quill as his mouth is just hanging open and his eyes are literally just bulging out of his sockets. And the animation doesn't really... And the animation, I think, is a little bit simplistic in that regard, where it just, like, it's just not even a full facial close-up of him. It's just, you know, we just sort of see a little, like, it cuts off about, I'd say about there, and that's all it really shows. And you're like, you could have taken full advantage of that moment and just try and make it as creepy as it once was. But like I said, I shouldn't have... The animation should not, you know, deter from the very quality of the story itself. I think the animation is just there to sort of give us a visual representation of what the story could have looked like. And I think in that regard, it does its job pretty well. I think there are still some moments that make me just think, oh, I wish we could see this, but this is as good. This is the next best thing. Like, for me, the scene I would like to see is like at the very end where they have the helicopter scene between where the Doctor, Jamie and Victoria are in the helicopter and they're trying to escape from the rigs that are being consumed by the foam, and there's a lot of sort of stuff that the Doctor does with the helicopter, you know, doing like flying in between the legs of these big sort of oil of the rigs, and you know, and apparently they said that that was how it was in the original story, that, you know, they actually did fly the helicopter exactly how it was depicted in the animation, and I think it was the same helicopter, and I think it was the same helicopter and the same operator that they later got to do the helicopter scene in The Invasion. And also, again, a nice little Easter egg that the animation does, again, linking it to The Invasion, on the loudspeakers in the compound, sort of the compound area, you can see on the loudspeaker they've actually put in the insignia, or the sort of the logo for International Electromatics, and I thought that was just a little clever nod to the Invasion, particularly with both the helicopter and the guy who was flying it. I think it was Mad Mike. So yeah, Fury from the Deep, I think it's still a great story, even if I do think the animation is not as good as the previous entries. It's still a very good story to listen to. And so what is next in line for Doctor Who animations? Well, apparently we're getting rumours coming around saying that the next stories to get animated for next year, if that comes through, people are saying it's going to be Evil of the Daleks and the Abominable Snowmen. And if these rumours are true, then I think that would be, and those are two interesting stories to do, because I think, you know, Evil of the Daleks is, again, it's the next best Dalek story next to Power, and, you know, Abominable Snowmen is, I think I would be interested to see how that one plays out, because my main exposure to the Abominable Snowmen was the Target novelization. So that I would like to see how much of a difference there was between the original story and the Target book. So yeah, if you haven't yet bought Fury from the Deep, then I sincerely recommend checking it out. Even if, you know, again, if you're a completist like me, you should definitely get it. And or just in general, if you're curious about animated Doctor Who, this is another good version to have. So yeah, that's it for this review. It's a good story, and I'll see you next time, where I promise it will be the Stones of Blood. So thanks a lot, and see you next time.